Jødiske Kulturfestivalens vegne vil jeg gerne på Jødiske Kulturfestivalens vegne vil jeg gerne byde velkommen til Dariusz Stola, som er kommet her for at fortælle om et meget fint museum, Polin. And I'll switch to English now, as this is going to be in English. So I would like to welcome Dariusz Stola from Poland, from the Polin Museum in Warsaw, which is a very nice museum. I've been there twice myself, actually.
And you bought the ticket?
Yes, sometimes. Yeah. Well, actually, the first time that the museum, the exhibition wasn't open yet. So, but yeah, welcome.
Thank you very much. This is my first time in Denmark, my first trip to Copenhagen. So excuse me for not speaking the local language. I will speak English as the lingua franca. Actually, Polish is more difficult than English, so you will understand. I would like to show you our museum and tell you a little bit, not so much about the history of Polish Jews, but the way we show it, because it seems that we show it in a way which is innovative, which is new, and which earned respect both among the experts in museology, history, and also ordinary visitors. So, because I'm a historian, I'm professor of history, and I became the museum director by incident. But I like this job. Actually, it's probably the best job I ever had. I will tell you a little bit of a history of the museum, how it came into being, because it took 21 years to make it, which is not too long for cultural institutions. There are cultural institutions that were in making for centuries. In our case, it was 21 years. And then tell you what it is and what does it make. Because for me, institutions are important only when they do something. And it seems we do something interesting, which may be of interest to you. So, first is the place where the museum stands. We stand in a part of Warsaw called Muranów, which up to 1942 was the biggest Jewish city in Europe. It would have been the biggest Jewish city in the world if not for emigration to New York, which became the biggest Jewish city in the world. So Jews made more than 30% of the population of the city of Warsaw, and before the First World War, 40% of the population of Warsaw. And in the northwestern part of Warsaw, where the museum stands, it was 80 to 90% Jewish. So actually a whole quarter was predominantly Jewish with a tiny non-Jewish minority. It was a world in itself. And you can see a photograph of Franciszkańska and Nalewki Street in the heart of it. And one of the Yiddish writers of the interwar period wrote that the corner of Nalewki and Franciszkańska, this is the center of the Jewish world in general. So what we did when the construction was started for the museum, we excavated ruins from beneath the ground of Nalewki Street, took a brick, cut it by half, and now this is the mezuzah at the entrance of the museum. This is the symbolic connection between the modern museum and Warsaw, which doesn't exist anymore. Why doesn't it exist? Because of this. This is the same place in 1945. During the war, Germans established the biggest Jewish ghetto in Europe. More than 450,000 people went through the ghetto. Most of them were killed in the summer of 1942 in the gas chambers of Treblinka, during so-called Great Deportation Action in just 2 months. And then, during and after the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, beginning in April 1943 and later on, the ghetto was systematically destroyed. So this is how it looked. Actually, the nearest pre-war building from our museum is some 700 meters away, and that was the SS station for the ghetto. So this is why it was possible. Otherwise, the area was a sea of ruins, as you can see. Actually, the museum stands, a part of it, on a piece which, after the defeat of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and the liquidation of the ghetto, Germans established a concentration camp inside the former ghetto. So we are standing at the far end of this concentration camp, which was liberated. The prisoners were mostly foreign Jews, not Polish Jews. And the prisoners were liberated in summer of 1944 during the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. So it's a place of very dramatic history. And this is important to understand, because the original idea to make this museum emerged with a group of my colleagues, historians, who were invited to the opening of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, in the United States. And they went back and they were so much impressed because the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. was the first big narrative museum. And this is a new, well, at that time, it was a new model of showing the past in a narrative way, not beginning with a collection, a set of objects, but with a story to be told. So Grażyna Pawlak, who is the founding mother of this idea, she went back and said, we need to have such a museum, but not a Holocaust museum. And I think this is the key combination. A narrative historical museum which is not restricted only to the Holocaust part of the Jewish history of Poland. So this is how it looked during the communist period. You can see huge empty square, a park that was a highly densely populated part of Warsaw. This part of Warsaw actually has the highest population density in Europe in the 20th and the interwar period. So it was empty, and you see the buildings, nondescript housing buildings. You can see them from Vladivostok to East Berlin, and all of the Soviet bloc were very similar, with one important element. Nathan Rapaport 1948 monument to the martyrs and heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto, which remains the most important place in the vicinity. So the red square which you see is the land given by the city to this monument. And it was important, the city contribution, because it took 21 years to make the museum for a very simple reason. There was not enough money. It's always, the reason is always the same. But today, I see it as a blessing, because there was not enough money for the construction works, which is most expensive. But there was some money, mostly from private sources, to make research and reflection. And this museum is very well reflected. There were 20 years of research, talk, and especially quarrels, mostly between the historians and curators. You know, if this is a Jewish museum, it cannot be a computer. So it was only in 2005 that the Association of the Jewish Historical Institutes, Friends of the Jewish Historical Institute, which was the initial group of the promoters of this idea, they convinced the mayor of Warsaw, at that time that was Lech Kaczyński, later on the president of Poland, and together they went to the Ministry of Culture. And in this triangle they established the museum. So the museum now has 12 years as an institution. And this combination is important to understand because we are unique in Poland as a public-private partnership. And in particular, a public-private partnership with an important international component. Because the founders divided work very wisely. What I mean wisely? The ministry and the city, they paid for the building, which is, it was something like 170 million zloty, not too much for a building of this size and its beauty. While the association was responsible for producing the core exhibition. So what is the wisdom? The wisdom was that politicians are very nice people, they want to help. And they couldn't call a curator or historian and say, I don't want what you do. Okay, there was this buffer. And of course, all the partners expressed their opinions in the museum council, but it was very transparent. Who thinks what and who has the leading role in the core exhibition. Moreover, association is just ordinary non-governmental organization. It didn't have much money, so it had to fundraise. And that was the most successful fundraising campaign for culture in Poland ever. I mean, going back to the kings of Poland in the 18th century. Because it raised equivalent of almost $55 million. And I say in dollars because most of the money came from the Polish Jews in the United States. My favorite city is San Francisco, for this reason. But we have friends both on the East Coast, the West Coast. However, the single biggest donation was from a Polish Catholic. So it was quite ecumenical, I would say. And then public money came from the city and the ministry. And altogether, it made possible something which I myself was skeptical. After 10 years of talking about the museum, I was a historical consultant. I said to my colleagues who were in the team, oh, you will keep talking the next 50 years, you will never make it. So I was a man of little faith. Today when people ask me if I believe in miracles, I say no, I rely on them. Because that was a thing. So this is the grand opening of the core exhibition, 2 years and 7 months ago. You can see President Komorowski speaking. Here is the President of Israel, Mr. Reverend Rivlin, sitting. And in fact, when I speak about the miracles, I can give you one example. This museum was personally supported by 4 consecutive presidents of Poland. Mr. Kwaśniewski, Kaczyński, Komorowski, and the President Duda. To my knowledge, this is the only topic they agree on.
Yeah.
It was also supported by 3 consecutive presidents of Israel. Mr. Herzog, Mr. Peres, and Mr. Rivlin now. Mr. Peres actually, he couldn't visit the new museum, he was already sick, but sent us a beautiful letter of support. And again, they had a few topics they agreed, but not so many. And one of them was this museum. So unusual, extraordinary understanding that this is something important and worth doing. However, at this ceremony, it was not the presidents who cut the ribbon and opened the building. It was Mr. Marian Tulski, a survivor of which ghetto, survivor of the Auschwitz concentration camp and the death march, and Joasia, a young girl from the Jewish school in Warsaw, and they opened, as 2 generations of Polish Jews, they opened the museum. So politicians attended, but they didn't play the key role in the opening. And this is the building. All of us who work at the museum, we love the building and we love the Finnish designer, Finnish architect who designed it. There was international competition for the design of the building. Thank you. And personally, I was betting my money on Daniel Libeskind.
Yeah.
Great names in architecture participated. Peter Eisenman, Kundo Kenda, Libeskind. And I believe Libeskind, he did the great museum, Jewish Museum in Berlin. He did the Memorial of the Ground Zero in New York. And you know, he's of Polish Jewish origin. He grew up in the city of Łódź. So everybody believed that Libeskind would win. But the jury selected an architect who previously was completely unknown in Poland, Rainer Malamaki from Helsinki, from Finland. Why? And this picture can explain why. The jury said that other designs, and these were great designs, for example, Libeskind design was a building looking like an open book. People of the book, very expressive, beautiful. But the jury said other designs were too much expressive. And they dominated the monument. And the jury said the monument is more important than your great ideas about architecture. Malamaki designed a building which is very simple. It's a big green box with a strange entrance. You can see here. But otherwise, it's very simple. When I asked him later on, Rainer, how did you develop the idea of your museum? And he said, this is very simple. This is a jewel in the box. The box is simple. The jewel is inside. And this is the jewel. The main lobby. So the beauty of the building is hidden inside. You enter the building and you see something completely unexpected.
Yeah.
It's an organic shape. Most of the people have never seen anything like this. It's huge. And what is important for me, many of the visitors immediately ask, what does it mean? What is the symbolic meaning of this entrance? And Malamaki, when he was asked initially, said, well, architecture doesn't need to have a meaning. It's an abstract art. It must be functional and beautiful. It doesn't have to mean anything. But when the jury was pushing him, he said, okay, this is the Red Sea, the parting in front of Moses. Moses, okay, and this is the symbol, leaving the slavery, going into the future. I think it's a beautiful interpretation, but I have my own interpretation. I like hiking in the mountains. And in Poland, we don't have rocks of this color. In Poland, it's mostly granite, gray, green, not like this. But if you have been to Israel, to the Judean desert, or to the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, you could see canyons called in Arabic wadi, which look exactly like this. Exactly like this. The same color of rocks, strange shape due to erosion. So for me, this is a symbol of a very ancient civilization from Near East, which was transplanted to this country of long winters, pine trees, potatoes, and vodka. And we tell what happened afterwards. How is a civilization from a very different part of the world was transplanted to Poland some 1,000 years ago, and we tell the rest of the story, what happened. But there are other interpretations. One interpretation is because this lobby divides the museum from the roof to the bottom. So some people say this is the symbol of Shoah, of the Holocaust, the rupture in history. And this little bridge, actually we call it Bridge of Memory, connecting the past with the present. Actually it connects, here we have educational center. So we connect education with the past this way. But it's open to all kinds of interpretation, and I love it. Because it's, for me, the museum, historical museum, is a place of meaning. So the fact that people enter the main lobby and they immediately are looking for a meaning, it's a good sign. And they like it. The museum, the building was ready for the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in spring 2013. And only the core exhibition was ready a year and a half later. And in this year and a half, 400,000 people have seen the building. Some of them came to see the architecture, but others were coming to our cultural and educational program because the museum operated before it existed. It's very unusual. Usually museum starts, there is a collection, private, public, then there is a building to show the collection, and then they add cultural program and then education. In our case, it was the opposite. We didn't have at all a collection, we didn't have a building, but we already have a cultural and educational program. There was, next to the construction site, there was a big blue tent called Optaget, okay, for public lectures, concerts, small exhibitions, and so on. And I really appreciate it because when I became director, more than 3 years ago, many people in Warsaw already have heard of this museum, which didn't exist. So it was much easier to advertise something which was known to the people than something completely unknown. So now the core exhibition. The core exhibition is the center, is the head of all the enterprise. As I said, it was formally produced by the Association of the Jewish Historical Institute, which fundraised globally, but mostly in the United States. But the concept, the scenography, was this really a renaissance. Jewish history is one of the best researched parts of the history of Poland. So because it started over the 1980s and then it greatly developed in the 1990s. So a lot of thinking was already done, was ready for all the periods under consideration. This is our medieval gallery. The core exhibition is large. It's more than 4,000 square meters of exhibition space. For those of you who are not experts, it's almost 2 kilometers of walking. So when you come visit, do have comfortable shoes. It's a long walk. We have mezzanines, so that it's 2 levels on some parts. It's very big. And we don't start with history. We start with a legend. We start with a legend about the origins of the Jewish settlement in Poland. The legend was recorded by some Yiddish writers in the 19th century, but it's certainly much older. And the legend says that many, many years ago, sometimes in the Middle Ages, when Jews were persecuted in Western Europe, they were marching eastward, seeking some refuge. And they arrived to a forest in Eastern Europe, and in this forest, and here there are several versions of the legend. Some say they have heard a voice from heaven. Some says there were slips of paper hanging on the trees. But the voice and the slips said the same. You shall rest here, Polin in Hebrew. As a critical historian, I believe they misheard the name Polani, the original Slavic tribe which established the Polish state. But the legend is beautiful, not as a historical source about the origins of Jews in Poland, but about what Polish Jews in the 19th century thought about the origins. And they thought, we have been here for a long time, and the Almighty Himself told us to stay. So this is very important for the 19th century understanding, not for the Middle Ages, because, well, I cannot exclude that the Almighty really said it, but we don't have a strong archival record. And this is the only section of the core exhibition. We call it the forest. It begins with, which is outside of time, because everything else is inside the time. What does it mean? After we have opened the core exhibition, we are collecting comments. And quite a number of people were saying, why didn't you make an introduction? What does it mean to be Jewish? What is Judaism? Kind of a general introduction. And the answer was no, it would be wrong. There is no such thing as being Jewish outside of time. It meant a different thing in the 13th century and in the 20th century. So it doesn't make sense. What we do is in all the galleries, we in fact tell 3 stories. We tell the history of Polish Jews, but then to make it meaningful and understandable, we tell the general history of Poland. And then we explain what did it mean to be Jewish in this specific moment. So these are 3 interrelated strata, and actually we have special paths. If someone is interested only in Judaism, he can have a little map and go along the religious tradition. If one is interested in the family and the changing family patterns along the centuries, he or she can go along this path. But we don't take things out of history. In many Jewish museums in the world, you have separate sections on rituals. Now we say it's always in time. Second, with the Middle Ages, it's a long period, it's 500 years up to 16th century. we only have two kinds of original objects which remain. And these are tombstones, matzevot, and coins, little silver coins. So we have a little silver coin from the 12th century. Why do we have it? Because this is a coin with the Hebrew letters. The name of the Polish prince is written in Hebrew. Why in Hebrew? Well, I suppose he was illiterate anyway. So he didn't care in which alphabet he couldn't read his name. And the reason was very simple. The minters were Jewish craftsmen who arrived, were immigrants to Poland from Western Germany or France. So they were invited by Polish monarchs as skilled immigrants. And this is very clear. Here on the left, we present the statue of Kalisz, 1264. We had anniversary some time ago, which is one of the original documents granting the Jews a set of rights and privileges. The protection of the king. Why it was important? Because if you were not protected by anyone in the Middle Ages, you were defenseless. There was no equality of citizens. So the Jews were protected by the king and they were treated as servants of the crown. And the king had a very strong economic interest to invite them because they were developing the economy. They had skills, they were craftsmen, and they had skills in monetary economy. Not only minting money, but general skills in monetary economy and international contacts, which were important for international trade. So consecutive monarchs of Poland were reconfirming the statue of Kalisz for the next 500 years. One day I was guiding our potential donor, a businessman from an IT industry, and I told him that was a kind of the legal constitution of the Jewish life in Poland for the next 500 years, including economic rights, such as the right to trade, the freedom of movement, and the right to offer financial services, primitive financial services. And he said, you know, in my industry, regulations change every 6 months. And that was half a millennium. So when people ask us, what is the most important period in this history? We say 1,000 years. And this is not just a nice way to show the length of the history. In most of European states, the Jews were evicted at one moment or another. You know that from Spain, the Jews had to leave or convert to Christianity in the late 15th century. The same was in Portugal. But the same was in France, England, many German states, many Italian cities. In Russia, they were not allowed to settle through most of the history up to the partitions. So Poland is among the few countries where you have uninterrupted presence for 1,000 years. So this is, we show this medieval gallery, and I said we don't have many original objects. So we had to invent something. And one invention was to treat the words like objects from the past. Like the archaeologists treat pottery or something they found underneath. What does it mean? We always give quotations in the original language. This is why we have some 9 or 10 languages in the core exhibition, and then translated into Polish and English. The exhibition is bilingual. So for example, one of the first languages quoted is Arabic. Why Arabic? The Jewish Museum in Poland. Because every child in Poland have heard about Ibrahim ibn Yaqub of Cordoba. Because he has recorded one of the first sentences of the existence of Polish state. He was a merchant from Cordoba. He was sent on a trade mission to Eastern Europe, and he recorded, there are a few passages of the state of Prince Mescal. Nobody knows that he was Jewish. And even less people know that he wrote it in Arabic. Because his king was a Muslim Arab. And he was a kind of a spy for this Arab king of Cordoba sent to Eastern Europe. So a story which is surprising in the 21st century, that you may have a Jewish merchant writing Arabic for a Muslim king about Poland. But this is to show how we treat words. We treat words with a lot of respect. And there are many of them. When you come, you will see there are many of them. Here we explain, this is the touch screens where we explain the institutions of the Jewish community in the medieval town. The synagogue, the ritual bath, the ritual slaughterhouse, the institution of the rabbis, and we have a lot of multimedia. Actually, we have 250 computers in the core exhibition that steer the touch screens and the overhead projectors. It was very useful although the initial idea was that multimedia is something that young people love, that teenagers love multimedia. No longer. Why? Because today every young man has a multimedia in his or her pocket. It's no longer anything special. But it was very useful to solve the battle between historians and curators. Because we historians believe that the more you say, the better. And we are wrong. Curators were saying since the beginning, less is more. When you say too much, it's too much. It's distracting the visitor. So the compromise was, okay, we will not put all the information the historians want on the wall, but we will put them in the multimedia. So if you are interested in a topic, you can approach a touch screen and read more about this topic. In total, we have 5,000 pages of text and pictures, which means you can spend a whole week in the museum, and you will not complete all the information which is available for reading. Here we jump already to the third gallery. This is about the golden era of Polish jewelry, which was 16, most of the 17th century, except for the Kozak uprising of Bogdan Chmielnicki in 1649. And I skipped the early modern gallery to show you the biggest, and some people believe the most beautiful exhibit in our exhibition. This is a wooden reconstruction of a synagogue from the little town of Gwoździec, which is today in western Ukraine. Since the origins of the idea of the museum, it was clear to everyone that we must have a reconstruction of the wooden synagogue. Why? Because that was something most typically Polish Jewish. Wooden synagogues. Before the Second World War, there were some 200 wooden synagogues in Poland. No one of them survived the war. All of them were destroyed by the Germans. But before the war, a group of Polish architects made detailed documentation. And actually we have republished recently a book, Gates of Heaven, on wooden synagogues of Poland, made on the basis of the photographs and drawings from the 1930s. So we have very detailed documentation to reconstruct it. However, the problem was all of it was black and white. The photograph was black and white. Only for a few synagogues we had colorful paintings representing the synagogue. And one of them was the synagogue of Gwoździec. You can see how colorful it is. This is why we have chosen. Speaking about the miracles, when the decision was made to reconstruct this particular synagogue of Gwoździec, Professor Kirschenblatt-Gimlet, Gabara Kirschenblatt-Gimlet, who is the chief curator of the core exhibition, she's Canadian by birth, now she lives in Poland, went to New York for a conference. And then she was speaking that we planned to reconstruct the synagogue, and she met a group of people from a university in northeastern United States who were reconstructing the bima from the same synagogue. So two groups of people on two continents decided to reconstruct pieces of the same synagogue. If this is not a miracle, what is a miracle? What is more important than you don't see it? This is not just a copy. The question is how it was made. You may have original objects from the past, like this little silver coin, and you can have a contemporary reconstruction or a picture of something. This is something in between. This is a wooden synagogue made with the tools and technology available in the 17th century. No electric drillers, only hand labor, 2 years of work. This is an idea which we took from Japan. In Japan, they have many very old wooden temples. Some of them are 800 years old. Usually, wooden construction cannot last so long. It falls apart. What they do, in every generation, they dismantle the building and they build it again exactly the way they have learned 25 years before. So what they preserve is the know-how of making a medieval temple. In Poland, the Germans burned the synagogues, but they didn't burn Catholic and Orthodox churches. And they had been made by the same people. You know, one year, these craftsmen, the carpenters, had a Jewish client, another year they had a Catholic client, another year they had an Orthodox client. So the know-how remained. And then a necessary component was Mrs. Irene Pletka, an Australian of Polish Jewish origin, who gave us more than $1 million for this reconstruction. We could take 200 young people from 9 nations. First, they were learning the skills from these masters of carpentry, and then in several localities in Poland preparing. Finally, in the open-air museum in Samot, in southeastern Poland, there is open-air museum of wooden architecture. They put it together to make sure everything works, dismantled, brought to Warsaw, and built it inside the building. The building was already in construction. The painting was, again, no electric drillings, no nails. The technology and the tools were coming from the 17th century. The paint was made on the basis of a receipt from 18th century. Why 18? Because we know that in the 18th century the synagogue was repainted. So again, it's something, a kind of authenticity, which is not the original, but it is not also a regular copy. It's something in between. Everything you see is meaningful. It's not only aesthetic, it's meaningful. Every animal has a meaning. For some reasons, the Almighty forbade the Jews to represent animals and human beings, to avoid idolatry. So if you have a deer, or if you have a lion, or an elephant, they are not to represent an elephant. They represent something meaningful from the Bible. So for example, there is a big picture of the unicorn. Here is the unicorn and the lion. The lion is the symbol of power, of strength. The unicorn is the symbol of justice. When they come together, they show the virtues of God, because only God is almighty and just. We had a little diplomatic incident some time ago. The Foreign Affairs Minister of Australia was visiting Warsaw and came to see the museum, and she spotted, here, a squirrel. And she said, you have a kangaroo. And Polish diplomats were accompanying her, yes, of course, a kangaroo. But my colleagues who are experts in the 18th century and who are experts in the Bible said, this is impossible. There is no kangaroo in the Bible. So you cannot have a kangaroo, but nobody commented. And so the Foreign Affairs Minister of Australia was misled by this information. And again, you have the multimedia. You can spend hours reading the description. What is the meaning of the animals? What are the Hebrew prayers? You can spend a few hours just in the synagogue watching how beautiful it is. So this is about 40% of our exhibition. Then again, I make a jump between the synagogue and this is the interwar gallery. We have the 19th century, but in the 19th century we have the smaller rooms. It's difficult to make a picture. I made this jump. We call it the street. It looks actually like the street. And this is the gallery about interwar Poland, 1920s and 1930s. And some people claim that was the second golden age of Polish Jewry. Not because of some special previous. Russia was a relatively liberal country. The Jews were allowed to have political parties, associations, cultural life was thriving. And even the rise of anti-Semitism in the 1930s contributed to the communal life of Polish Jewry. So here on the left, we show the politics, the many Jewish parties, from right-wing Zionists to the Bund on the left, and Aguda, the conservative party, in the middle. And the pre-war joke says that 3 Polish Jews make 5 political parties, which is underestimate. My favorite exhibit is a poster of this size, and this is a copy of a leaflet that was given to the Polish administrators in the low-level administration, and that was the list of the major Jewish parties and their position on major topics. And this is a piece of paper of this size. My second favorite exhibit is a little leaflet which says, "Don't vote for Wiślicki." It was an electoral leaflet for one of the elections which said in Polish, "Don't vote for Wiślicki." Wiślicki was a senator in independent Poland. He was several terms in the Senate. His grandson is the chairman of the Association of the Jewish Historical Institute. I meet him on a week. That was he's from his family archive, so it's very nice. On the right, we show culture, the richness of the Jewish culture in interwar Poland, from high literature to the popular music. Actually, what we learned in preparation of the core exhibition, that most of the most popular songs of interwar period, both the lyrics and music, was written by Jewish composers and Jewish poets in Polish. And to this you must add the same in Yiddish and something in Hebrew. We also have a collection of the front pages of the Jewish newspapers in these 3 languages, Yiddish, Polish, and Hebrew. Most of them were in Yiddish. And this is just a selection. So you can see the diversity and the variety, the richness of this cultural life. Speaking about the computers and the multimedia, what you see is not painted on the walls. Do you see the projectors? Everything you see is screened from the projector, so we can change it. We can change the scenography of this place. However, these are the regular cobblestones, and the street itself, it goes along the same line, same axis that Zamenhofa Street was running up to 1943. Now it's elsewhere. It's 40 meters away, because after the war, the street grid was put in the different places. So we repeat the axis of the Zamenhofa Street. This is the next gallery, the Holocaust Gallery. And Holocaust Gallery is different from all the galleries. I said that people often ask us what is the most important period, and many of them believe that must be about the Holocaust. And indeed, the Holocaust Gallery is the biggest one in terms of space. It's the biggest one, but it covers only 6 years out of 1,000 years. So you have a very short period in a very big gallery. And the reason is very simple. That was the most dramatic moment in the history of Polish Jews, and we are in the former Warsaw Ghetto. So most of this gallery, we show life in the ghetto. How much energy it took, what kind of tricks, for example, to smuggle the food into the ghetto were necessary to make the ghetto survive for almost 3 years before it was completely destroyed. So here you can see stages of the German anti-Jewish policy, and over here you see the list of all the ghettos in Poland. And when we ask visitors who leave the gallery, the core exhibition, we make the exit poll. We ask them, what do you think you will remember from this exhibition? And I was surprised that many of the Polish visitors, they say, I will remember this list. Why? Because I didn't know there was a ghetto in my town. People know about the big ghettos, like Warsaw or Łódź or Białystok, but they don't know that there was a ghetto in their town. And you have a list of more than 400 ghettos in all of pre-war Poland. However, as I said, so we show in this gallery primarily the Warsaw Ghetto as a pars pro toto. Warsaw Ghetto as an example of all these ghettos in Poland. But the Warsaw Ghetto was unique. It was the biggest one. It was almost completely isolated like the Łódź Ghetto. But we stress life. And sometimes we called our museum the Museum of Life. Why? Not to focus on the perpetrators. That there is much, much more in the history that we show than just the genocide committed by Nazi Germany between 1940 and 1945. And this is a problem in terms of explanation, because visitors, and we have many visitors, I'll give you numbers in a second, they usually know very little of Jewish history, but if they know something, it is the Holocaust. The one and only thing they know is the Holocaust. So in the medieval gallery, in the modern gallery, 19th century gallery, we need to make an effort to let them suspend this knowledge, because to understand the people who built this beautiful synagogue, you cannot think about what happened to their great-great-great-children. They didn't know it. Obviously they didn't know. So in fact, we try to make the visitor think only about the period that he or she is. And then, when they enter the Holocaust gallery, there is a kind of a double shock, because they are somehow reminded of what eventually happened, and they realize how much was lost due to the Holocaust. So we show Warsaw Ghetto, and then the deportation of the Warsaw Ghetto to Treblinka in summer 1942, and then we explain two things. First, we explain survival outside of the ghetto, that means hiding, including the relationship with the non-Jewish population. And second, we explain that the Holocaust, the so-called final solution, was a global continental project. And this is the only moment when our exhibition goes outside of Poland, because we need to show all of Europe to make the visitors understand. For example, we show the protocols from the Wannsee conference, when the German administrators decided the deportation of the Jews to the death camps. And we show that they didn't forget a tiny group of Jews in Albania. Okay, 400 Jews in Albania, and they still have them on the record not to forget them. And this is the only moment that we move outside of Poland. The only moment when we show Hitler is we have a film of the German military parade in Warsaw in September 1939. That was the only moment that Hitler came to occupy Poland, and it's the only moment we show him. We never leave the place and the time we show. So for example, we use the exhibits only coming from this specific time or copies of them. We don't use interviews with the survivors for the Holocaust Gallery because the interviews were made after the war. We use only memoirs written during the war. Only evidence coming from this specific period. What is important for me that the Holocaust Gallery is not the last gallery. Many people believe that the history of Polish Jews ended in 1945. No, we have a post-war gallery which first shows that while only 10% of Polish Jews survived the war, that was 300,000 people. Still, it was the 5th largest diaspora in Europe at that time. And that was only through the 4 consecutive waves of emigration that it was reduced to just a few thousand. So we show first the return to the ruins, the efforts to re-establish Jewish life, and parallelly efforts to commemorate the Shoah, which goes parallel. This is why we have big pictures of the unveiling of the monument of Rapaport among the ruins. You can see the vicinity of the museum. We show the post-war violence, including the Kielce pogrom of 1946, and the consecutive waves of emigration, 46, 49, 56, and eventually 68. And then, after 68, this is the last section of the post-war gallery, we somehow change the topic. Because for the 1980s, we don't show the Jewish institutional or communal life because there was almost nothing in Poland. But we show another miracle, which was the emergence of interest in Jewish history among non-Jewish Poles. And it started already in the 1980s, and it continued through the 1980s with a growing number of publications, research, and cultural festivals. This is our last exhibit. This is a touch screen with interviews with leaders of the Polish Jewish community today. I mean, right before the opening of the exhibition. So this last exhibit, it says 2 things. First, well, they answer questions such as, who makes Jewish culture? Is there anti-Semitism in Poland? What do you think of Israel? Basic questions that people usually ask Jews in various countries. But for me, it's important for 2 reasons. First, it shows that the history that we present has not ended. So maybe 3 years from now or 5 years, we'll have to add something. There will be a past which is now a future. And second, that this museum will never be completed. Because there will be always some future, as we believe, to expand. Right after the opening, we had an incredible attention of the media. In the first 2 months, we have collected 4,000 press clippings from printed media, television, internet websites. Practically all Polish newspapers commented the opening. Major newspapers in Israel, Western Europe, North America. Here you have just a selection. For example, we had a full-page review in The Economist, which is an economic newspaper. It's highly unusual for this newspaper to give so much space to a cultural institution like ours. So we were surprised. We had some 300 TV and media crews present at the opening. And that was very helpful, because immediately after the opening, people started to massively arrive to see Polish and foreign. So very quickly, we had to reorganize our system of customer service, because there were too many many more visitors than we expected. Today, 2 years and 7 months after the grand opening, we have already had 850,000 people who have seen the core exhibition alone. It's a lot of people. For a young museum, it's no unexpected. 70% of our visitors are Polish, 30% are foreign, and among the foreign visitors, the biggest groups are Israelis, then Americans, and then various European countries. We have audio guides in 9 languages, major languages, including Yiddish. We are the only museum in the world having an audio guide in Yiddish. Well, maybe, I don't know, maybe 100 visitors have used it. But that was for symbolic reasons. We did it probably more for the people whom we show in the exhibition than for those. But we had for example, we had a group of Orthodox people from Brooklyn, New York, and they appreciated. Some of them was quite an expert, said this is the Vilna Yiddish. Very good, very good. In total, more than 1.5 million visits to the museum we record. So this is the core exhibition makes more than 50%, and the rest are people coming for our concerts, public lectures, educate. We do a lot of education. And the visitors like us. We make exit poll. We ask a random sample of visitors and ask them some questions. One of the questions is a standard question on customer satisfaction. Many companies ask this question. Would you advise your family and friends to come and visit this museum? And most of the companies ask this question. So we can compare our museum. In our case, about 90% of the visitors say strongly yes or yes. And we know they do it. Because when we ask, where have you learned about the museum? 50% says from family and friends. So they really say. Only a few percent says no. So this measure is called Net Promotion Score. In our case, it's bigger than in case of iPhone or BMW. Less than Harley Davidson, those who use motorbikes. But the question is, why? This is not a Disneyland. This is not a theme park. This is not an amusement park. This is not made to make you funny, pleasure. Actually, the Holocaust Gallery is deliberately designed to feel bad. It's small, claustrophobic, gray and black colors only. The walls are curved. It was made so the visitors feel bad in this space. And still, they say, I want to convince my family and friends to do it. And I don't know why, actually. We have some theories who will research it. One of the theories is there is very little comment. There is a lot of information, especially quotations from the sources in many languages, but very restricted comment by historians. We leave a lot of room for the visitors for their own interpretation. We don't say, this is what you should think about. I will give you one example. The Kielce pogrom of 1946. A very painful moment in history we show, and especially controversial for the non-Jewish Polish visitors. What we do, we have 4 quotations. One is from the Communist Party newspaper. The other is from the anti-communist underground leaflet. The third is the letter of the Bishop of Kielce to the American ambassador. And the fourth is by an intellectual, a professor. So the first says basically, this is the reactionary forces acting against the people's government of Poland. The anti-communist said that was a provocation of the Soviet NKVD to hide the manipulation of the plebiscite that took place a few weeks before the bomb. The Archbishop of Kielce has somehow ambiguous position. He says, oh, this is horrible, but I condemn it. But the Jews collaborate with the communist government. And finally, the intellectual says, this is a moral disaster, that after the war, you have people killing innocent Jews. And we don't comment. We give the sources and let the visitors, okay, now you make your own judgment, what you can figure out. And probably this is a reason why they like it, because we don't impose the conclusions. They can reach them by themselves. Here you can see a selection of the awards that the museum have received. Last year, we became the European Museum of the Year. This is the most important European Museum award. No Polish museum in the past and no Jewish museum in the past have had this award. In Europe, there are some 100 Jewish museums, most of them small, but Berlin, Paris, Vienna, Munich, they are quite large. So we are the first one to receive it. 3 months later, we received the second most important European Museum award, the prize of the European Museum Academy, which is, they don't give it every year, only when Jewish museum. This is kind of. Then we've got the most important Polish Museum Award for our temporary exhibition. And 3 weeks ago, we've got Europa Nostra, which is the European Union Award for Cultural Heritage Protection, for our education. And again, we are the first Polish museum to receive it. Actually, my colleagues, the staff of the museum, got demoralized because we haven't got an award for the last month already. In fact, most of what is available to any museum in Europe. And this is nice, to be recognized by experts as a good museum, because initially, many museologists in Poland were skeptical. I remember a director of a very well-established museum coming to our museum, visiting and saying, well, you have a nice exhibition, but this is not a museum. He meant we don't have a big collection. For him, a museum is a place where you have thousands or millions of objects in a collection, which we don't have. We have just a few thousand of objects. So, to be recognized as an important museum, we needed this otherwise. But for me, more important is the opinion of the visitors, that they like it, and especially that kids like it. Our key mission is education. Every year we have dozens of thousands of mostly secondary school kids from secondary schools. Thanks to a grant of Norway, we have developed a very large program of education for secondary schools and for the teachers. And we had to make it competitive, because it's not obligatory. We must be attractive enough so the teacher decides to bring the kids to the museum, and that was quite successful. Yes, this is our temporary exhibition last year of Frank Stella. Frank Stella, he's an American abstractionist. Back in the 1970s, his colleague gave him an album on these wooden synagogues. And he made a series of reliefs. This is something between a painting and a sculpture. So he not only borrowed us these objects for our temporary exhibition, he came himself, and we received Sibylla, which is the Polish most important award for exhibitions, exactly for this exhibition. We make two exhibitions a year. We have just completed an exhibition on popular music, invented by our colleagues from Austria. It turned out that not only the composers and the authors of the lyrics, but also the companies that were making vinyl discs in interwar Poland, that was mostly Jewish business. So we had a nice exhibition on popular culture. And next spring we will have a big exhibition which may be of interest to some of you on 1968 in Poland. Because next year is the 50th anniversary of the so-called anti-Zionist campaign, which was, in a sense, anti-Semitic, and the last wave of immigration of Polish Jews. And we are going to make a huge exhibition on this topic. We do a lot of cultural program. We have a nice auditorium for 500 people. Here you can see a Philharmonic orchestra, but we also have rock music depending on the age group of the audience. One more miracle. This auditorium was designed for conferences. And acoustics for conferences and music is different. But miraculously, it has good acoustics for concerts. So Maestro Penderecki was conducting one of his pieces at our museum. He said, well, not bad, quite good. So it must be a miracle, because it usually takes specialists in architecture for this kind of house to make. We reach out. This is our most famous campaign. You can see yellow daffodils. This is this little paper flower. If you have been to Great Britain or Canada or New Zealand on November 11, you have seen people with red poppies. Yes. So a younger colleague of mine, a young girl employee of the museum, she combined this tradition with a tradition introduced by Marek Edelman. Marek Edelman was one of the leaders of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, a Bundist. He remained in Poland, and for more than 20 years, on April 19th, an anonymous donor was sending him yellow flowers every year. To this moment, we don't know who was it. So with these yellow flowers, Marek Edelman was coming to the monument of the Warsaw Ghetto to put the flowers to commemorate the victims. In the 1980s, he was organizing alternative commemoration, alternative to the official communist one. So one of my colleagues invented this to combine yellow flower with this red poppy, and she designed this yellow daffodil. When you unfold it, is a Star of David. In many Polish towns, Jews under German occupation had to wear armbands or yellow stars like this to be recognized. It was a way of labeling, of recognition. We made it a sign of memory. Our volunteers distribute these yellow daffodils in the streets of Warsaw, April 19. This year they distributed 95,000. So you can see, actually you can see the streets people with these yellow daffodils. Including President, Prime Minister, ministers, and many ordinary people. Actually, you know, for me the pleasure was that on the same day I have seen the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition having this daffodils. So again, a miracle. This is in Warsaw. Outside of Warsaw, we prepare an educational package for schools and public libraries. And this year, 1,100 schools and libraries participated. That means the teachers voluntarily asked us for these materials and had a class about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Last year, we've made a film, a short animated film on the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. I didn't like it when I saw it at the beginning. It was blue. It's a combination of cartoon, animated film, and original interviews with the eyewitness. The exhibition for each town, there is a general part, what is Yiddish, what are the religious rituals, and so on. And the local history attracts most of attention. To this moment, I think 72 towns were visited. We have almost 2,000 press clippings from the local media, all of them positive. And this is really a mystery, because we know that about 25% of the population in Poland has some anti-Jewish prejudice. By all sociological research, we know it. There is a standard way of measure. You ask, do you think that Jews have excessive influence on media, politics, and finance? Okay, this is for international comparisons. Okay, and in Poland, it's very stable, especially in the countryside. Less educated group is even higher. But despite this prejudice, there is so much attention in provincial Poland, not big cities, in provincial Poland. So today we make a competition. We have so much interest in the exhibition that every year we send a call for proposals, and local governments must do something. If you want to have our beautiful exhibition, you must do something. For example, clear the cemetery, make a memorial plaque, make a program for the kids at the elementary school so they can learn the Jewish history of the town. And we always operate in the triangle with the local government and the NGOs, the civic organizations. Finally, we are on the internet. We have several websites. So this is our main websites. You know, you can, how much are the tickets, what is the opening times, and so on. But this is our biggest website, the virtual Stätte. You can see the English version is fully bilingual, Polish and English. This is a kind of historical encyclopedia of Polish Jews. Last year, we had 1.8 million visitors. Not visitors, visitors. 80% visit the Polish version, 20% the English, from all around the world, New Zealand, Argentina. This is, to my knowledge, this is the most extensive publication on the history of Polish Jews, and it's still growing. We add articles every week. This is a smaller one. This is about Polish righteous, the rescuers of the Jews. Here you can see an article about Warsaw Zoo, hiding of the Jews in the zoo of Warsaw. And this is a mobile application. When you visit Warsaw, you can walk with it. This is about the Jewish history of Warsaw. So altogether, we had more than 2.3 million visitors on this website last year. So it's really many people who had it. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any more questions, feel free to ask them. Yes.
I visited the museum and I enjoyed it, and it's magnificent, and I can only encourage everybody to do that visit.
So you belong to the 90% of those?
I do. And I think you said we don't really know what it is that really attracts people. My suggestion would be it's the authenticity. It's really strong. So my question is, the current political climate, with the sort of turn towards a more nationalistic, more sort of inward-looking, has that affected you? Does that change anything in the society that you're sort of part of now as a museum?
Well, I'm very concerned as a citizen, but as the director of this museum, I'm not. That means if you ask about political pressure, etc., no such thing. The present government, I would say the president, for example, President Duda visited the museum, and at the end of the visit, standing in front of the cameras, he said, every young Pole should visit this museum. And I didn't ask him. That was on his own. However, certainly xenophobic tendencies have been stronger in Poland. We know it from the teachers who cooperate. We have a network of teachers all around the country. We know that the extreme right organizations are penetrating, with the internet websites. They are traffic for the young people. So we see a rise of xenophobia. It's mostly against Muslims and refugees, and we have maybe 5 refugees. It's really, in Poland we don't have refugees, but we have a lot of fears against refugees. And even there is a study done by Michał Bilewicz, the leading expert in ethnic prejudice in Poland, and there is in the past 2 years a very visible increase of declarations of xenophobia against all groups, Jews included. So there is I think it's pan-European. For us, is one more reason that this museum is very much needed.
You need some more efforts from Jews to take over Poland, maybe.
Well, the Polish Jewish community is very small. And I think most of the community have visited the museum immediately. In fact, before we officially opened the museum, we have had a special day for the Polish Jewish community before the opening. I have established at the museum an advisory body which consists of representatives of the major Jewish organizations in Poland. So we meet every 4 months. I tell what are my plans for the future. In particular, I don't want to interfere with what other organizations are doing. This is a big institution. We have 160 people staff. We have a big budget. We can easily do some harm to them. So I think there is a good cooperation between the museum and various Jewish institutions, and there is a continuing support. Is the answer to your question, or you have more specific, please?
No, because I think it's about something private. I have something from my grandmother.
This kind of donations, I see.
I think it's feeling.
Yes.
It's more than 130 years old.
Yes.
And I happen to see them, and I am not a big believer. So I should not say this here, but what shall I do?
We are receiving, if not on a daily, on a weekly basis, these kinds of gifts. These are mostly family souvenirs, not necessarily big art, usually of high emotional value. Probably the most moving object that we were given is a silver spoon given by a woman who was smuggled out of the ghetto. This is the only thing remaining of her Jewish family, because she survived with a Christian family. So the silver spoon was given to the baby to pay for the cost of the living. And we have this kind of objects. I had one very moving personal experience. It was already several months ago. My colleague historian called me and said, a man will come to see you. He gave me his family name. Don't be afraid, meet him. And the man comes. He has a hood. He looks like a football hooligan. Hood, Adidas shoes, and so on, with a big bag. He was not looking like an amateur historian at all. But because my friend called me, so he said, okay, please come in. And he put the bag on my desk, opened it, and put a scroll of Torah outside of the bag. Where do you have it from? He said, I bought a house, some 100 kilometers east of Warsaw, a wooden house, and I found it in the attic, between the walls in the attic. So probably it remained in hiding since 1940 or 1942. And because in the attic it was dry, it was very well preserved. So I said, what are you going to do with it? I said, I'm going to give it to this museum. He said, well, it's very generous. It may cost something like 10,000 euro or something. He said, no, this belongs to the Jews. So there was a kind of a moral understanding. Well, sometimes we have people who come and ask for money, of course. But usually people give family archives, and we register them, we scan them gradually to make them available, visible online, and we also use them in our education, because showing something original has an incredible impact when you meet real people who need something real. So if you have objects like this and would you like to contribute, we really appreciate. It's more important than money, I believe. Yes.
Could you explain, because there can be several explaining, but how would you interpret this interest in Jewish history in Poland that you described starting in 80s, if I remember? Was it somehow influenced by the economic support from states and other, you mean from Jewish communities around? Was it? Well, I would like to hear your interpretation of this interest.
This is not the first time that I hear this question.
Yeah.
Okay, my answer is I don't know, because this is also my personal question. I'm not Jewish, not to my knowledge, but in Poland you never know. And in the late 1980s I decided to write my dissertation on Jewish history.
When?
1988.
Yeah.
I decided to write, and I wrote a dissertation on the Holocaust actually. And I know other people who have this interest. Actually, most of the historians of Jewish history in Poland are Christians. But up to a moment I thought this is about intelligentsia, the educated class, because for Polish intelligentsia, Jewish history is much more important. Because intelligentsia of Jewish origin made a significant portion of Polish intelligentsia in general. But now at the museum, with these experiences of these teachers in small towns, of these kids watching the film somewhere, or the mobile exhibition attracting so much attention from very ordinary people without education, I think it's more than the history of the educated class. And I don't know what is it. I only know that these local towns, that people are very interested in the Jewish history of their town. They were somehow ready to accept that Jewish history is their history. Because this is my town, and Jews made 50% of the town, so their history is now in my hands. I think this is the best way that can happen. Because these people, maybe they will protect the ruins of the synagogue, they will take care of the cemetery. Otherwise, it was desolate through all the communist period. But I don't have a good explanation. There is a number of books about it. Why is the revival of the Jewish community in Poland? And why is the revival of the interest in Jewish history in Poland? So there is a number of books, but I haven't read any good theory to explain it in an easy way. So I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer, but sometimes good questions are better than answers.
Yes, but you said that the history of Polish Jews is perhaps the best, sorry? The best investigated.
It is.
Comparing to the rest of the history of Poland. And I think this interest of the scholars is very significant.
Yes, but there are topics that you have interest of the scholars, but there is no popular interest.
Yeah, but I wonder why scholars are more interested in the working with this Polish minority. So there is more work in this field comparing with the other fields in Polish history.
Maybe. I think that there is also something like a regret. A feeling of regret that something important was lost.
When I compare interest, I've been several times, I'm Polish myself, in Poland, and when I speak to intellectuals and educated people, I feel that interest in Jewish past could be compared with the interest in Indian past in the United States of America. When they disappeared, they became really something precious in the national history, and somehow I feel it's...
Maybe a little bit, but I think the role of Polish Jews in Polish society, culture, politics was much greater than Native Americans in the history of the United States. I think so, Polish Jews made 10% of the population, but 30% of the urban population and 50% of the cities in eastern Poland. 50% of Polish lawyers and doctors were Jewish. In Eastern Poland, 90% of all the shops were Jewish. 90% of taverns in Poland were Jewish. So this is more than a nostalgia for something lost. I think so. It's much more, you know, maybe different people have different motivations, as it usually comes. Yes, please.
When I visited your museum, I thought you have a lot of information around the whole history of the Jews. But one thing I thought that was missing when you get to the year of 68, of the communist time and the political time, you have pretty much like one small room and no multimedia around that effort. So actually, if you dig in yourself, you can actually find more documentation around like the exits of the Jews of the communist time. So I was wondering like why that part is so small in your museum compared to all the other historical parts of the Jews.
I will put it otherwise. Why is it so big? We had a lot of debates, really a lot of debates. How much space should we devote to each period and topic? This is 1,000 years of history. So for example, the fact that you have relatively large Holocaust gallery shows that this is disproportionate. For the post-war period, one very basic way, kind of a mathematical justice, would be to devote the space proportionally to the number of Jews living in Poland in the given period. And this way, 19th century would cover half of all the history, because there were 2 million Polish Jews, and that was 100 years. While in the Middle Ages, there were maybe 20,000 Jews, but that was 300 years. The moment which you say was a relatively short, it was a year and a half, 2 years, 68 and 69. The anti-Jewish campaign of the spring of 68, and then the immigration to the fall of 69. And you have this big wall with the TV screens. We have TV sets showing the head of the Communist Party speaking during the campaign. Then you have interviews with the emigrants. You have a small section called Dworzec Gdański, the Gdańsk railway station, which you can see. So for a relatively short period and a relatively small number of people, this is disproportionately large. But I would say the various groups have interest in various topics, some kind of a compromise to show some rabbis, some secular Jews, some immigrants of 1968. My favorite comment, I was interviewed by a journalist from a progressive Polish newspaper, Krytyka Polityczna, and she asked me, why have you wasted so much space for the Middle Ages? What have you wasted? Middle Ages, it was 500 years, very important period, the establishment of the Jewish community in Poland. But I don't know anyone from the Middle Ages. This sounds funny, but there is something important. There is much more interest in the recent history, the 20th century history. But for a historian, 16th century, this is the most important period, for example. For another historian, this is maybe the Chmielnicki massacre, the greatest tragedy before Hitler. For some others, it will be the moment of the establishment of the modern ideologies, Buddhism, Zionism, and so on. So this is my way of defending the proportion as they are. I know that many people are disappointed because they would like to see more. What is important for me, no one so far has said that you misrepresent the past, that you lie. And that would be a strong point. And this is why we do temporary exhibition. If you come to Warsaw next March, you will have a large exhibition exactly on this topic.
Essentially, it just proves it's a Jewish museum.
Yes.
If it can cause that much disagreement, it's truly a Jewish museum.
Rabbi Shudri, when I told Rabbi Shudri, the chief rabbi of Poland, what kind of problems that I would like to accommodate all the interest because I want people to come and see it. Come on, there must be disagreement.
The last question, if there is.
Why would last?
Eva, yes, please.
Thank you very much. I should start by introducing myself so that everyone knows that this was the unofficial comment. Henryka Mościcka, I'm the ambassador of Poland here to the Kingdom of Denmark. It's really a pleasure to hear you, Professor. I heard you many times before, and it's always marvelous, and I think all the audience will share that. But I was wondering, this question about why is the Jewish life so interesting for Poland? For me, it's also a personal question. I'm not Jewish, I'm Polish by birth, as far as I know, but in Poland, as provinces, I will never know. If not the Second World War, I would be born in what today is Ukraine, and not where I was born, in southern Poland. And I always, I mean, for me personally, and I was born in the 70s, I grew up also because of my parents, with a world they spoke about, which I never understood, and which was not existent. And I think this museum represents for me part of this lost world. And I will tell you a personal story. Before you opened, you mentioned Polin Museum several times. For me
Sorry, but we cannot hear what you're saying.
Before the museum was opened, there were this temporary exhibitions Professor Stola mentioned. And one of them was about Warsaw, this pre-war Warsaw. And you entered the museum, and there was basically a city plan of the Jewish quarter in Warsaw. And I entered this part. I was blessed by being allowed to enter with Marian Turski, one of my heroes. But I must tell you, I was blessed by being able to work for many of these heroes of the past. Professor Bartoszewski was my boss for a time. And I was always wondering what made these people make the right choice when it was difficult. And I think this moral obligation is also part of our answer to the question why we are interested not in the Jewish life or in the multicultural Poland of pre-war times. But when we entered Warsaw, I mean this Jewish quarter of Warsaw with Marian Turski, it was like if I was diving into a real world. We were walking on the streets, and he was perfectly able to say who lived where. And I got a short introduction in all the big names I remembered, including the Bartoszewski family, and then short anecdotes about them. And people I knew only from pages of books became part of a reality, and I will never forget it. If I ever write memoirs, this scene about men entering the Jewish quarter through the Polin Museum will always remember with me. For me, it's a very personal experience. But my question to you, Professor, would be, if I'm allowed to ask the last question, whether you have the impression that this museum also helps the revival of Jewish life in Poland, meaning that people come and they start searching or diving into their past. And I ask also because there is a lot of publications in Poland now about, let's say, Polish Jewish families. I will just recall the last book of Monika Schneiderman, Fałszerze pieprzu, for those who speak Polish, and Counterfeits of Black Pepper should be the English title, if I'm not mistaken. It's her personal family history. She's half Jewish, the father was Jewish, and the mother comes from the Polish pre-war aristocratia who lost everything in the eastern part of Poland. And then she describes this personal experience with both histories and both cultures, and there's plenty of such publications these days in Poland, including about the very difficult parts of Polish Jewish history, including Holocaust and after-war history. There is this fantastic book about Białystok, for example, by Marcin Komski. So I wonder whether you have an impression that the museum is also supporting this revival.
It was kind of a feedback mechanism, because museum was possible thanks to, among others, to this revival of the community, which was miraculous revival after 1989. And then, this is what I heard from all of the members of the community, bringing his children. So for many years he was ashamed of being Jewish. He didn't disclose it, and now he can probably bring his kids to show his great past. And we see, for example, we have a resource center. Thousands of people annually come to ask about possibly genealogy of their family. They want to learn about it. Polish and foreign visitors, it's quite time-consuming because you have sometimes a few dozen people coming and asking this question. So I think there is this loop that the reinvigoration, renaissance of the community contributed to the museum, and the museum contributes to the perpetuation of the community. In more general, maybe to the re-evaluation of diaspora, especially among the Israeli visitors. The diaspora is not only a mistake. the diaspora was a flourishing period through many years, and so on. And I hope so it remain in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.